A lot of companies are starting to think about the frameworks, right? All the agentic frameworks. CrewAI is a framework. But you don't need just a framework. Like, it's kind of like, yes, those are faster horses, but you want a flying car. I can tell you the companies that we see most success with, they follow a pattern.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of AI Without Borders, a podcast showcasing the contribution of Latin American entrepreneurs, operators, and investors in the global AI space. I'm thrilled to have Joao Mora, founder and CEO of CrewAI, as our first guest. CrewAI is an orchestration platform for building and deploying multi-agent system that started as an agentic framework. Crew raised a $17 million Series A led by Insight Partners in 2024. But most importantly for this podcast, Joao was born and raised in Brazil. Joao, welcome. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about doing this. And yes, talking about Latin America is definitely wild. But yes, it's gonna be great. I'm very excited.
I'd love to start with your background. When were you first exposed to the world of AI and what sparked your interest in it? And I'm curious, did being born and raised in Brazil impact that journey in any way?
Oh, yeah. I think, honestly, not only AI in general, but tech. My exposure to tech, I think it came from a very, very early age. And I think, I started working pretty young, probably way younger than most U.S. citizens would be familiar with, just because it's kind of like a trend in Latin America. So I actually got my first side gig at 13, and I was working part-time, 5 hours a day already, with full documents and everything at 15. So I think and now that I was already in tech, I was already doing some ActionScript 2.0, some Visual Basic 6.0. So was a very early exposure to tech, and I have never stopped coding since. So I think the fact that I was born and raised in Brazil definitely got me in earlier than I would say most people would get. And that was beneficial for me because it got me so much exposure to so much things. And I think also it contributed to build a lot of work ethics from the early days, right? Understanding all right, this is how you're supposed to do it. But that was amazing. My exposure to AI specifically, I always was interested in AI to some level, but I really got to that in 2017. And that was when I was really trying to figure out how to do this prediction models and classification models. I was working on a company that had a bunch of interesting challenges that I could see how AI could help with that, but I had no clue on how to start. So that's when I started studying it. I remember taking a small course at, I won't remember the name now. Oh, General Assembly. I took a short course on General Assembly, and that helped me get things going. And then I fell in love with that. But that's how I first got exposed to AI.
Oh, that's amazing. Likely the highest ROI of any course, of any person that has taken a course.
For sure.
So Crew has grown and evolved a lot since it started. So I personally used it to build a memo generator at my fund that we recently open sourced. And while leveraging Crew, one of the things I saw is that you are offering so many options to the users, whether they want to enable memory, use sequential processing, and many more. So as you grow, how do you balance enabling more complex use cases, but at the same time maintaining the ease of use that I think CrewAI has been historically known for at the same time?
Yeah, I think ease of useness is definitely something that you need to be mindful of, right? Especially if you're thinking about, I think there's different lens. If you look through the lens of the open source, you want to make sure that you're factoring in the developer experience, right? How it actually feels for you to build something with that tool. And that's something that we're very mindful of. So the way that we think about it is in different layers. If you want to do something that is very boilerplate, or if you don't want to customize it very much, it should be extremely easy for you to get by. And we should be very opinionated about it so that it's straightforward. But that should not come at a cost of not allowing you to go really deep if you want to. So if you really want to change all the details on how this works and you want to customize the internal APIs, you can still do it. And that's something that we focus a lot on the open source side of things. Now, when you're thinking about enterprise side of things, a little different because being easy there is not necessarily the same thing as being easy on the open source framework, and being straightforward is also not the same thing. And the challenges differ a lot, right? And I think like building with the framework is fun and it's easy, but if you're going to have thousands of agents running your organization like 5 years from now, you don't want that to be 1,000 GitHub repositories, right? So I think that's like, that adds an extra layer of complexity, and especially on how to make it simple. But we have a saying in the company that is, we would rather take the complexity to ourselves instead of let it to the user. So as much as we can, we try to take like the complexity on, so we make it simpler.
No, that's a great approach. And yeah, I agree on your 1,000 GitHub repos. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, as the companies have like many thousands of agents in production, even at the CISO level, like knowing that there are 1,000 entities doing work and kind of that supervision and managing all of that, it's going to be an interesting challenge at the same time. But I want to dive deeper on your thoughts on the overall now agent space. So last week we saw the OpenAI O3 reasoning model release, also the now very famous and spoken about DeepSeek launch. What impact have you seen these reasoning models had on agents? Have you seen any new use cases emerge? And also, what are some of the challenges that these reasoning models have on how people will build and deploy this new kind of more powerful agents?
Yeah, and I mean, OpenAI is on the strike, right? Like they're doing one after the other. There was the operator, then last night was deep research. So yeah, there's so much going on. I think that in the end of the day, we have tried to use some of this kind of like bigger models, especially O1 when it came out. And what we found out is that they're not necessarily good for our kind of agentic behaviors, because they have that kind of like inner chain of thought like embedded into them. What happens is that they most of the times try to do all the work themselves, and they defer less into kind of like using tools or asking another agent just because they have their inner monologue. So what they seem to be great at is creating plans. So kind of like being supervisors of other agents and all that. I think that as these models get better, like I haven't tried O3 Mini yet. I want to make sure that I do it. But I think as these models can like get better and faster, you might say like, all right, I wanted them to actually be the actual agents. But I think there's a first principle in engineering here that still applies. And that is kind of like, what is the maximum that I can get away with?
Yeah.
Like if I can use kind of like an OpenAI for a mini, and that kind of like gets the job done, I think that would probably be better optimizing for speed and cost than using kind of like a bigger model. So to be completely upfront, we're not seeing these models being deployed as agents widely out there just yet. I think it's going to come to that as they kind of like improve in efficiency and speed. But I think results are pending still.
It's good. It's still so early. Like even for me, many times I still struggle when to use the reasoning models, when to not. And I imagine now the application that to agents is like 10 times bigger. And even so related to that, as you mentioned, this is fresh out of the oven with yesterday OpenAI releasing their new deep research agent. I've been playing around with it this morning. Actually, I've been quite impressed. For me personally, and my job as a BC, I would say it's the second largest kind of OpenAI release since the original ChatGPT launch. But I wanted to ask you if you had any initial thoughts on the release. I know it's been just a few hours as well, but also which areas of agent developing you think foundational model players will mostly build and capture, and how do you think about that as you also build on your roadmap for Crew?
Yeah, I gotta say the deep search thing is amazing, and I think Sam Altman made a tweet last night that I think kind of like it captures why it is amazing. We don't realize how much of the workforce is actually research. Like he mentions that in the tweet, saying like this can actually now do single digit percentage of kind of like what actual work of humans are. And like that's insane. I think some people might argue that's more or less, but like no matter what, like this, like you can literally hire people to do researchers like this, and they would spend hours and you'd have to pay them like kind of quite a lot of money. So I think it's interesting how now that we're getting this models access to things that we have built for humans, what they're now able to do. So yeah, I think like if anything, I'm very bullish on the agents more and more, just of seeing everything coming out. Now, what that means for Crew is honestly all these bigger companies, especially the foundational models and also the hyperscalers and everyone. I think they have so many, their distribution is insane, right? That's kind of like one of their superpowers, the distribution. And what distribution favors is usually consumer use cases, right? Because yes, you can definitely see research being used in enterprise, and that is amazing. But it's very more focused on the end user more than anything. When you think about what a big enterprise could use in the deep research, that last mile there is huge. Like we're talking
Hmm.
about authentication, scoping, sessions, connections, like all those
Yeah.
things along the way. So I think that's always the gap that we have focus at, right? Like if you, and I think this goes back to what we were talking before, if you're convinced that you're going to have like thousands of agents running your company, is not only about the agents. If you think about it, it's all these agentic resources. Like what are the tools that they have access to? What is the authentications? How impersonation? How scoping works? And how do you manage all that? So I think our roadmap is very much focusing on kind of like the control plane for all these agentic resources. And if anything, seeing more of like consumer focused agents being deployed out there makes me even more bullish on it, because I think once that people experience that, their first question is, all right, how do I bring that now
To
into
my
my
company.
company on the day to day? Yeah.
No, that makes sense. And one follow up to that is one of the things I've been thinking about is the great thing about this agentic market is that it's still so early and there's so many things to build. But you have a finite amount of resources. I'm curious to decide how you prioritize your roadmap of CrewAI. And for example, I know CrewAI offers some logging for the agents, but at least on other podcasts, you mentioned that maybe it isn't a priority. Tools, older tooling, maybe another good example. So how you determine which areas are core so that you build them internally, and what other areas you think it's better off for other startups to build and for you to then leverage and connect with them.
I think it's funny because early days, like there were things that I would consider that were big enough that like there could be a whole business to kind of like take this on. And the time as time goes by, I'm becoming a little more quote unquote like greedy. If you think about like, you know what, I
Yeah.
think we could take that one. I think we can actually get that. But in the end of the day, what you said is like the ultimate truth, right? If you think about it, the one thing that startups get like going their way that the companies don't is speed of iteration and the ability to take big bets, right? You can take big bets that bigger companies just can't. Like they're not designed to kind of like do that. So in order for you to leverage that though, you have less resources. That's kind of like the downside comparing with this big company. So you got to be really like focused on kind of like what your strategic bets are. So I think that's kind of like the way that you should be thinking about it. The way that we are doing it internally is one, customers are the main North Star. And what that means for us now is there's so much inbound because there's so much interest in agents that we need to very quickly understand who is high signal and who is high noise. So a lot of like what we do is aggressively qualifying this leads, and then we use their use cases as kind of like the North Star to understand what features we want to go after and what we want to implement. And eventually there's bats, right? Eventually there are things that are like, all right, customers might not know what they need, or they might know that they
Yeah.
need this, but I'm bullish that this would work. And we took a few of those that have been very successful so far. So I think there's also that sense of just being plugged into the market and see like what people are not seeing, right? And one thing that I would say is exactly, I think we're touching this again, and it's over and over. A lot of companies are starting to think about the frameworks, right? All the agentic frameworks, CrewAI is a framework, but you don't need just a framework. Like you don't want to, it's kind of like, yes, those are faster horses, but you want a flying car. So I think there's some of that kind of like we need to always be watching for.
No, that's completely true. And maybe is there something you can share around how you curate between that high signal, high noise ratio? I know multiple companies are more advanced in we're exploring this. We have a concrete use case, and there are others where it's like we are exploring it. Others, we want to start something, but we really don't know about it. Does that make one or the other better?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I can tell you the companies that we see most success with, they follow a pattern. They have executive support. There's like someone pounding the table saying like, we need this is a mandate. Two, they have technical sponsorship. There's some sort of engineers involved in the conversation, right? Either people that are going to set things up or people that are going to build initial use cases and things like that. Three, they have use cases, and their use cases have urgency. It's not like, oh, we have 300 use cases that we found out. Like, no, no, no. These are like the three most important for us. And usually there's a very like quote unquote tight timeline, right? They want to try something out. They want to see value in like 30, 60 days. And once we see some of those signals, there's more to it, but like those are some of the things that we watch for. We actually have a framework and a spreadsheet that we fill up and then goes into our CRM. So like we basically score them in a way. And if they're above a certain score, then we kind of like for lack of a better term, we bear hug them. We're like, all right, now you're stuck with us. We're going to make sure that you're successful.
No, that's great, and maybe related to this topic. So I'm a huge follower of you on X, and I encourage people to follow Joao. He shares a lot of insights and trends around agents. So you recently shared two interesting tweets that relate a lot about adoption. So in one, you mentioned closing more deals in the last 6 weeks than any previous quarter. And in another, you wrote, and I quote, "The hardest part isn't building the technology, it's teaching the enterprises how to adopt it." I would love if you can share a little bit more about that commercial journey and also that increased adoption that you've seen more recently. Was it a result more of the market maturing overall, or more of the product development of Crew, or changing approach as well in that go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, I gotta say the go-to-market strategy was fun. I mean, we have been doing this for a while now, and like in AI years is like, I don't know, quite a while. But I think that a lot of what we're doing is what you said, like it's early days. It's early days in the market for the consumers. It's early days in the markets for the builders. So a lot of like what we're doing is kind of like figure out the market dynamics, right? How you sell this, how you navigate this, and because it's such a new market, how much you balance educating with selling. And if you favor too much one versus the other, you might be sucked into kind of like deep conversations that don't turn into commercial opportunities, and you don't want to do that, right? There's some things that you need to watch for. I think early on, what we learned was balancing this kind of like educational approach with the selling. So we have done kind of like seminars within companies, like 4-hour sessions for like 100, 200 people in some of these Fortune 500 companies that have turned out to become amazing customers, and they close and then they expand the deals with us. And we also have done some that turned out to not become customers at all. So I think a lot of what we spent early days was kind of like, what we usually say is kind of like nailing before scaling.
Yeah.
So kind of like nailing the process, finding that repetitive motion, that repetitive signal that we can now teach others to do it so that we can grow the team and say like, hey, this is what we're watching for. This is how the process works. And we know that we got a good conversion rate if we do it that way. So again, a lot of trial and error, a lot of kind of like, what if we do this, what if we do that? Now, educational alone proven to be an amazing resource, especially if you can do it at scale. So, for example, some of our courses on deep learning AI, they are just like a force of nature on driving usage. And whenever we see leads coming to us, and like we see people like from Fortune 500 coming to us, and their CTO said, "I took your course," like, and they're like, "All right, so this guy has used open source. He's committed into building kind of Agentic. He took our courses." It's kind of like it checks a bunch of boxes. It makes the conversations way easier. So I think we're betting more on kind of things like webinars and long-term content and things like that. And that has been helping on the go-to-market. Now, if that's going to scale or not, resume spending. But I think we're finding a good balance. It's just like, is the company building aspect of things, right? You always have to reinvent yourself and find an edge.
Yeah, no, I can validate the quality of the deep learning code. It happened a similar thing to me, not a Fortune 1000 company for the use case for us, but made us use the product. So I would love to close with doing a quick fire round. So short questions, and you give me your quick reactions. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
So CrewAI shared a survey last year to show the state of agents. On one of the questions, you showed that 16% of respondents had agent features in production. If you had to guess, what would that value be by the end of this year?
Depends. If we cut the same way, like companies that are coming into us, I'd expect to see at least double than that. If we cut off a broader audience, I would say that would be that number. What would be an increase? But yeah, I think depends on how we pull the audience. If we pull the same audience, I would say at least double.
Wow, that's a huge increase. So the other part is you travel a lot between Brazil and the US. Do you see any difference in how companies in Latin America approach generative AI adoption versus in Silicon Valley and overall in the US?
Yes, for sure. I gotta say, Latin American companies, believe it or not, they're willing to try new things more than most of U.S. businesses. They're more eager, like they're just eager to try new things. It's insane. I don't think people realize how big Latin America is and how much of GDP is within all those countries. And I think like they're just eager to try the things. They already have a vastly connected kind of like population, and they're very into kind of like social media in general. So they consume a lot of content and they're more open to things. I would say that would be it. But that is probably the one unexpected difference that I saw. Like it takes less convincing in Latin America to get people to try something brand new.
That was new, and I'm glad to hear that. Is there any one particular area that you're excited about the impact of generative AI in Latin America?
Yes, I think honestly anything that is kind of like bureaucracy and busy work, like Latin America is known for having a lot of that. And I think that also with that, you also have a lot of corruption that comes from all these processes because now you're going to figure out if you have to pay someone to help you get something that you would get anyway, but it takes like forever. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I just would wish that AI replace all of that.
Yeah, that in Colombia, getting a visa appointment, for example, it's such a long and tedious process. To close, the last question is, what other founder or operator or researcher from Latin America that it's outside the UAI, the CrewAI in the AI space you admire or respect the most?
Well, I gotta say, we have like some big winners that I think can like set the standard. So I think that the guys from Brax, I think they have done an amazing work. I still remember like a decade ago or a little over than a decade ago, like hanging with them and kind of like Brazil Ruby conferences, like a very technical conference around here. I think Nubank is another good one. I think a lot of people kind of like follow that up, and that is pretty great. Outside Brazil, we also have Mercado Libre. I think they also have set up amazing logistics. Honestly, I think like they queue in Latin America. I don't know, like global expansion will be tricky for them, but hey, let's see how that's gonna work. So I think probably those three companies are companies that I have on my radar that I think are great examples.
Yeah, no, those are all great stories. But no, Joao, it's been great pleasure to have you here. I've enjoyed a lot this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, thank you all for listening in. And I catch you later, I guess.